The sun was setting behind the rolling hills when Storm Eagle rode back into his village. His horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust as he guided the animal between the hide-covered homes that dotted the landscape like sleeping giants. 3 deer hung across his saddle, proof of a successful hunt that should have filled him with pride. Instead, something felt wrong. The usual sounds of children playing and women preparing the evening meal were missing. An eerie quiet had settled over the camp like a heavy blanket. Storm Eagle's weathered hands tightened on the reins as his dark eyes scanned the area, searching for any sign of his 2 daughters who always ran to greet him when he returned from hunting trips. Morning Star, his 8-year-old daughter, was known throughout the tribe for her bright laughter that could be heard echoing across the plains. Her younger sister, Little Fox, at just 6 years old, had earned her name by being clever and quick like the small red animals that lived in the nearby canyons. They should have been here by now, racing toward him with their arms stretched wide, eager to hear stories of his adventure. As Storm Eagle dismounted near his family's teepee, an elderly woman named Gentle Rain approached him. Her face was marked with deep lines that spoke of many seasons, and her usually calm expression now showed worry that made Storm Eagle's heart begin to race. "They are gone," she said in their native tongue, her voice barely above a whisper. "The little ones disappeared when the great storm came through." Storm Eagle felt the world around him shift and blur. His strong legs, which had carried him across countless miles of prairie, suddenly felt weak. The deer he had been so proud of moments before now seemed meaningless. Nothing mattered except finding his daughters. "Tell me everything," he demanded, his voice harsh with fear and growing anger. Gentle Rain led him to the center of the village where other tribal members had gathered. Their faces showed the same mixture of worry and confusion that Storm Eagle now felt burning in his chest. Red Cloud, one of the tribal elders, stepped forward to explain what had happened. "The storm came from nowhere," Red Cloud began, gesturing toward the western sky. "One moment the children were playing by the creek, gathering pretty stones as they always do. The next moment the wind began to howl like angry spirits, and rain fell so hard we could barely see our own hands in front of our faces." Storm Eagle listened, his jaw clenched tight as he tried to control the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He had seen many storms in his 32 years of life, but he had never lost sight of what mattered most to him. "When the storm passed," Red Cloud continued, "we searched everywhere. The other children ran to their families when the rain started, but Morning Star and Little Fox were nowhere to be found. We have looked in every hiding place, checked every cave, searched along the creek banks. They have simply vanished." An older warrior named Bearclaw spoke up from the crowd. "There were strange things about this storm, Storm Eagle. Some of us saw lights that did not look like lightning. They came from the direction of the white settlers' land, beyond the big hill where we do not go." The mention of the white settlers made Storm Eagle's blood run cold. For years, his people had lived with an uneasy peace alongside the newcomers, who had built their wooden houses and fenced off sections of land that had once been free for all to use. There had been conflicts before, misunderstandings that sometimes led to violence on both sides. The tribal leaders had made it clear that their people should avoid the settlers' territory whenever possible. But if his daughters had somehow wandered into that forbidden area during the confusion of the storm, there was no telling what might have happened to them. Storm Eagle had heard stories from other tribes about children who had been taken from their families, never to be seen again. The thought made his hands shake with rage. "Show me where you last saw them," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. The group moved toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of their camp. This was where the children often played during the warm afternoons, splashing in the shallow water and hunting for interesting rocks and shells. Storm Eagle knelt beside the muddy bank, his experienced eyes searching for any clues the others might have missed. There, pressed into the soft earth near a cluster of willow trees, he found what he was looking for. 2 sets of small footprints, one slightly larger than the other, were clearly visible despite the rain that had fallen. The prints were deep, as if the children had been running, and they led away from the creek toward the rolling hills that marked the boundary between Comanche land and settler territory. Storm Eagle's heart began to pound as he followed the trail with his eyes. The footprints continued for about 50 yards before disappearing into an area where the ground became rocky and hard. But the direction was clear. His daughters had headed straight toward the white settlers' homesteads. Standing slowly, Storm Eagle felt a familiar feeling wash over him. It was the same cold determination that had carried him through countless battles and hunting expeditions. But this was different. This was personal in a way that made every other challenge in his life seem small and unimportant. "I will find them," he announced to the gathered tribe members, his voice carrying across the evening air with absolute certainty. Red Cloud stepped forward, placing a weathered hand on Storm Eagle's shoulder. "You cannot go into their territory alone, my friend. It is too dangerous. If they have taken the children, they will be watching for us to come. We should gather a war party, plan our approach carefully." But Storm Eagle shook his head. "A war party will only bring more violence, and violence may harm my daughters if they are being held captive. I will go alone. I know how to move without being seen, how to watch and wait. I will find out what happened to them, and I will bring them home." As night fell over the camp, Storm Eagle prepared for a journey unlike any he had ever undertaken. He checked his weapons, filled his water pouch, and gathered enough dried meat to last several days. But more importantly, he prepared his mind for what he might find. He tried not to think about the worst possibilities, instead focusing on the image of Morningstar's bright smile and Little Fox's mischievous laugh. They were strong children, raised to be clever and resourceful. Whatever had happened to them, wherever they were, he would find them and bring them safely home. The moon was high overhead when Storm Eagle finally set out, following the faint trail his daughters had left behind. He moved like a shadow across the landscape, using skills passed down through generations of Comanche warriors. But tonight he was not hunting for food or fighting for territory. Tonight he was a father searching for the most precious parts of his world, determined to cross any boundary and face any danger to bring his children home. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Storm Eagle crouched behind a large boulder, studying the landscape ahead of him. He had been traveling for hours through the darkness, following the faint trail his daughters had left behind. Every step took him further from the familiar territory of his people and deeper into the unknown world of the white settlers. The footprints had been easier to follow than he had expected. The storm that had taken his daughters had also left the ground soft and muddy, preserving their small tracks like a message written just for him. But as the sun rose higher, Storm Eagle knew the mud would dry and harden, making the trail much harder to see. Moving carefully from one hiding spot to the next, he continued to follow the path his children had taken. The tracks led him through a narrow valley between two hills, past a small grove of oak trees, and alongside a creek that bubbled and rushed with water from the recent storm. At several points he could see where Morningstar and Little Fox had stopped, perhaps to rest or to get their bearings. What worried him most was how far they had traveled. These were not the wandering footsteps of children who had simply gotten lost and were trying to find their way home. The tracks moved in a straight line as if the girls had a specific destination in mind, or as if something had been guiding them forward. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Storm Eagle reached the crest of a hill and saw something that made his blood run cold. In the valley below, spread out like a patchwork quilt, were the wooden buildings and fenced fields of a white settlement. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and he could see people moving about, beginning their daily work. This was enemy territory, a place where his presence would mean instant danger. But somewhere in that collection of buildings and farms, he might find answers about what had happened to his daughters. Taking a deep breath, Storm Eagle began to plan his approach. He spent the rest of the morning watching the settlement from his hiding place on the hillside. He counted the buildings, noted which ones showed signs of life, and tried to understand the patterns of movement below. There were about 20 structures in total, ranging from small cabins to larger houses, along with several barns and outbuildings. What struck him most was how different this place looked from his own village. Where his people lived in harmony with the natural curves of the land, the settlers had imposed straight lines and sharp corners on everything they built. Fences divided the earth into squares and rectangles, and even the roads ran in straight lines that ignored the natural flow of the landscape. As he watched, Storm Eagle saw men heading out to tend their cattle and work in their fields, while women hung laundry on lines stretched between wooden posts. Children played in the dusty spaces between buildings, their laughter carrying up the hillside on the morning breeze. It was this last sight that made his heart ache with longing for his own daughters. When the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Storm Eagle began to move closer to the settlement. He used every skill his father had taught him about moving unseen across open ground, sliding from shadow to shadow, using rocks and bushes for cover, always staying downwind so the settlers' dogs would not catch his scent. His progress was slow and careful, but by late afternoon he had reached the outer edge of the settlement, hidden behind a pile of cut wood near one of the barns. He could hear voices clearly and see the details of daily life in this strange community. It was then that he overheard a conversation that made his heart race with both hope and fear. Two men were standing near a water well, talking in voices loud enough for him to understand, even though his knowledge of English was limited. "That storm yesterday was the strangest thing I ever saw," said the first man, a tall fellow with a thick brown beard. "My wife swears she saw lights in the clouds that didn't look natural." The second man, shorter and wearing a wide-brimmed hat, nodded his agreement. "My Martha saw the same thing. Said it looked like someone was holding lanterns up in the sky, moving them around in patterns that made no sense." Storm Eagle leaned forward, straining to catch every word. These men were talking about the same strange lights that his tribal elders had mentioned. But more importantly, they might have information about what had happened to his daughters. "You hear anything about those Indian children that went missing?" the bearded man continued. "Word is their people are pretty worked up about it. Some folks are worried there might be trouble coming our way." The shorter man spat into the dust and adjusted his hat. "Well, if any of them red devils come looking for trouble around here, they'll find more than they bargained for. We got enough guns to defend ourselves, and the sheriff's been through twice already today, making sure everyone's ready." Storm Eagle felt his anger rise at the man's words, but he forced himself to remain calm and hidden. These men did not seem to know anything specific about his daughters, but their talk confirmed that news of the girl's disappearance had already spread to the settlement. This meant he would have to be even more careful in his search. As evening approached, Storm Eagle retreated to a safe distance and began to circle the settlement, looking for any sign that his daughters might be there. He checked the areas around each building, searched for small footprints in the dust, and listened carefully for any sounds that might indicate the presence of children who did not belong. His search was made more difficult by the need to avoid the many dogs that seemed to guard every home. These animals had sharp noses and would bark at the slightest unusual scent or sound. Several times, Storm Eagle had to freeze in place and wait for long minutes while a curious dog investigated an area near his hiding spot. It was during one of these tense moments, crouched motionless behind a chicken coop while a large brown dog sniffed around nearby, that Storm Eagle noticed something that made his pulse quicken. There, in a patch of soft earth near the back door of a small cabin, were footprints that looked familiar. They were small and narrow, about the right size for a child, and they had been made recently enough that the edges were still sharp and clear. But what made Storm Eagle's heart leap was the distinctive mark of a torn moccasin sole that he recognized immediately. Little Fox had torn her shoe on a sharp rock just 2 days before he left for his hunting trip, and he had promised to help her fix it when he returned. These were definitely his daughter's footprints, leading from the cabin's back door to a small garden area where vegetables grew in neat rows. But what were they doing here? Were his daughters being held prisoner inside the cabin, or had they come here willingly, seeking help or shelter? Storm Eagle studied the cabin carefully from his hiding place. It was smaller than most of the other buildings in the settlement, with a single door and 2 windows that glowed softly with lamplight. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that someone was home and had a fire burning inside. As he watched, a figure appeared in one of the windows. It was a woman with long hair tied back, moving around inside the cabin as if preparing an evening meal. She seemed to be alone, which might make approaching the cabin less dangerous than Storm Eagle had feared. But even as he began to plan his next move, Storm Eagle heard a sound that made him freeze with terror. From somewhere not too far away came the thundering of horse hooves and the voices of several men riding hard in his direction. "He's got to be around here somewhere," one of the voices shouted. "The tracks lead right to this area, and there's nowhere else he could have gone." "Spread out and check every building," another voice commanded. "If there's an Indian scout sneaking around here, we need to find him before he reports back to his war party." Storm Eagle realized that somehow, despite all his care, he had been discovered. The men hunting him sounded angry and determined, and they were getting closer with each passing moment. He had to make a choice quickly: retreat to safety and abandon his search, or stay and risk capture or death in order to learn more about his daughters. Looking one more time at the cabin where he had found Little Fox's footprints, Storm Eagle made his decision. He would not leave without learning more about what had happened to his children, no matter how dangerous it became. His daughters were somewhere in the settlement, and he would find them or die trying. The sound of horses and shouting men grew louder as Storm Eagle pressed himself flat against the ground behind the chicken coop. His heart pounded against his ribs, but years of warrior training kept him perfectly still even as the searchers passed within arm's reach of his hiding spot. The scent of dust and sweat from their horses filled his nostrils, and he could hear their leather saddles creaking as they moved through the settlement. "Check behind every building," the leader's voice commanded. "If he's here, we'll find him." Storm Eagle waited until the sounds faded into the distance before slowly lifting his head to look around. The cabin where he had seen Little Fox's footprint still glowed with warm lamplight, and the woman inside continued to move about, apparently unaware of the drama unfolding outside her home. Making a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation, Storm Eagle began to crawl closer to the cabin. The footprints he had found were too clear, too recent to ignore. If his daughters were inside that building, he had to know, regardless of the danger to himself. As he reached the side wall of the cabin, Storm Eagle could hear sounds from inside that made his breath catch in his throat. There was the soft murmur of a woman's voice, gentle and soothing, speaking in English words he could not understand, but mixed with her voice were other sounds that sent electricity through his entire body. He heard a child's cough, small and delicate. Then came a whispered word in the Comanche language, so quiet he almost thought he had imagined it. His hands began to shake as he realized that his daughters were indeed inside this cabin, just a few feet away from where he crouched in the darkness. Moving with infinite care, Storm Eagle positioned himself beneath one of the cabin's windows. The glass was old and wavy, but he could see through it into the warm interior. What he saw there challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. His two daughters sat on a simple wooden bed, covered with thick quilts that had been pulled up to their chins. Morningstar, his brave 8-year-old, was holding her younger sister close, just as she always did when Little Fox was frightened or sick. Both girls looked tired and pale, but they appeared to be unharmed. The woman moving around the room was unlike any white person Storm Eagle had ever encountered. She was younger than he had expected, with kind eyes and gentle movements that spoke of natural compassion rather than fear or hatred. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, and she wore a simple dress that had been mended many times, suggesting that she was not wealthy or powerful, just an ordinary person trying to make her way in the world. What amazed Storm Eagle most was how she interacted with his daughters. As he watched through the window, the woman brought them bowls of what appeared to be soup or broth, helping Little Fox hold her bowl steady while she sipped the warm liquid. There was no sign of restraint or captivity. The girls were not tied up or locked away. Instead, they seemed to be receiving the kind of care that any sick children would need. The woman noticed that Morningstar had barely touched her food and knelt beside the bed, speaking in soft English words while making gentle gestures with her hands. Though Storm Eagle could not understand her language, her tone was unmistakably caring and concerned. She was trying to communicate with children who spoke no English, using patience and kindness to bridge the gap between their different worlds. Little Fox began to cough again, a harsh sound that made Storm Eagle want to rush inside and comfort her himself. But the woman was already there, placing a cool cloth on the little girl's forehead and humming a quiet melody that seemed to ease her discomfort. Storm Eagle realized with a mixture of gratitude and confusion that this stranger was taking better care of his daughters than many people would care for their own children. As he continued to watch from his hiding place, more details of the scene became clear. The cabin was small and simply furnished, but it was clean and warm. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. On a table near the window, Storm Eagle could see children's clothing laid out to dry, including small dresses that were clearly not made for white children. The woman had somehow found or made appropriate clothing for his daughters, but the most surprising discovery was yet to come. On the floor beside the bed, Storm Eagle spotted something that made his eyes fill with tears. It was Little Fox's favorite doll, a small figure made of corn husks and deer hide that she carried everywhere. Somehow the doll had made the journey with his daughters, and now it sat carefully placed where Little Fox could see it, a small piece of home in this strange new place. The woman noticed that Little Fox was looking at her doll and picked it up, examining it with obvious curiosity and respect. Instead of treating it as a crude toy, She handled it gently, as if she understood that it was precious to the child. She even tried to straighten the doll's tiny dress and smooth its cornhusk hair before placing it back within little Fox's reach. This simple act of kindness toward a Comanche child's toy told Storm Eagle more about this woman's character than 100 words could have conveyed. She was not the enemy he had expected to find. She was not keeping his daughters as prisoners or treating them with cruelty. Instead, she was doing everything in her power to care for two lost children who had appeared in her life during a terrible storm. As the night grew deeper, Storm Eagle watched the woman prepare his daughters for sleep. She tucked the quilts more securely around them, made sure the fire would last through the night, and even sang what appeared to be a lullaby in her own language. The melody was different from the songs Storm Eagle's wife had sung to their children, but the love and tenderness behind it were exactly the same. When Morning Star and Little Fox finally closed their eyes and drifted off to sleep, the woman did not leave them alone. Instead, she pulled a chair close to their bed and settled in to keep watch through the night. Storm Eagle could see the exhaustion in her face and posture, suggesting that she had been caring for his daughters around the clock since they arrived. From his position outside the window, Storm Eagle found himself studying this unexpected guardian more carefully. Her clothes were worn but clean, and her hands showed the calluses and rough skin of someone who worked hard for a living. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of worry and sadness, as if she carried her own burdens and sorrows. The more Storm Eagle observed, the more questions filled his mind. Who was this woman? Why was she alone in this small cabin? What had driven her to take in two Comanche children during one of the worst storms anyone could remember? Most importantly, what did she want from his daughters, and what would she do when she discovered that their father had come looking for them? As the hours passed and the woman continued her patient vigil beside his sleeping children, Storm Eagle felt his understanding of the situation shifting like sand beneath his feet. He had come here expecting to rescue his daughters from danger, ready to fight and kill if necessary to bring them home safely. Instead, he had found them in the care of someone who seemed genuinely devoted to their well-being. This discovery created a new dilemma that Storm Eagle had never anticipated. His daughters needed to return to their people, to their family and their way of life. But they also seemed to need the kind of care this woman was providing, at least until they recovered from whatever ordeal had brought them here in the first place. The sound of horses approaching the cabin area made Storm Eagle's muscles tense with alarm. The searchers were making another pass through the settlement, still looking for the Indian scout they believed was hiding somewhere nearby. Storm Eagle pressed himself lower against the cabin wall, knowing that discovery now would mean disaster for everyone involved. As the horsemen passed by the cabin, one of them called out to the woman inside. "Everything all right in there, Miss Mackenzie? You see anything unusual tonight?" The woman's voice came through the thin wall, steady and calm. "Everything's fine here, thank you. Just tending to some sick little ones who need their rest. Well, you keep your doors locked tight. There might be trouble about, and we don't want any harm coming to you or the children. I appreciate your concern. Good night, gentlemen." Storm Eagle filed away the name he had heard, Miss Mackenzie. So she was unmarried, which might explain why she was living alone in such a small cabin, but it still did not explain why she had risked her own safety to help two Comanche children who were clearly not her own. For 3 long days and nights, Storm Eagle maintained his hidden watch over the small cabin. He found a perfect hiding spot in a cluster of wild berry bushes about 50 yards from the building, close enough to see clearly through the windows, but far enough away to avoid detection by the woman's neighbors or their watchful dogs. Each morning, he watched Miss Mackenzie wake before dawn and begin her daily routine of caring for his daughters. She would check their temperatures by placing her hand gently on their foreheads, bring them fresh water to drink, and prepare simple meals that would be easy for sick children to digest. Through the cabin's windows, Storm Eagle could see her patience as she encouraged Morning Star and Little Fox to eat, using hand gestures and simple actions to communicate what words could not convey. What impressed him most was how the woman had created a sense of safety and routine for his daughters despite the language barrier between them. She had established regular times for meals, rest, and quiet activities. When the girls seemed restless or frightened, she would sit with them and tell stories in her own language, using animated expressions and hand movements that made the children smile, even though they could not understand her words. On the second day of his vigil, Storm Eagle witnessed something that made his respect for Miss Mackenzie grow even deeper. Little Fox had developed a fever that left her weak and shaking. Instead of panicking or sending for help from the settlement, the woman calmly began treating the illness with methods that reminded Storm Eagle of his own people's healing traditions. She prepared cool baths to bring down the fever, made tea from plants she gathered in her small garden, and spent hours applying damp cloths to Little Fox's burning forehead. When the little girl became delirious and began calling out in Comanche for her father, Miss Mackenzie did not become frightened or frustrated. Instead, she held Little Fox close and hummed soothing melodies until the child calmed down. Most remarkable of all, Miss Mackenzie seemed to understand that Morningstar was suffering not just from physical exhaustion, but from the responsibility she felt for her younger sister's well-being. The older girl had barely slept since arriving at the cabin, constantly watching over Little Fox with worried eyes. Miss Mackenzie began including Morningstar in the care process, showing her how to prepare the healing tea and letting her help apply the cooling cloths. This gave the 8-year-old a sense of purpose while also teaching her that she was not alone in caring for her sister. By the third day, Little Fox's fever had broken, and both children were clearly on the path to recovery. Storm Eagle felt a mixture of relief and growing confusion as he watched his daughters begin to respond more actively to their caretaker's kindness. They were starting to learn simple English words like water, food, and sleep, while Miss Mackenzie was picking up basic Comanche phrases from them. The woman had somehow acquired or made additional clothing that fit the girls properly, including small dresses in colors and patterns that seemed designed to appeal to children. She had also created simple toys and activities to keep them occupied during the long hours of recovery. Storm Eagle watched as she taught them to play simple games, using wooden blocks, and showed them how to help with basic household tasks like setting the table and organizing supplies. What struck Storm Eagle as most significant was how his daughters were beginning to smile and laugh again. The trauma of whatever had brought them to this place was slowly healing under Miss Mackenzie's patient care. Morningstar, who had been so serious and worried, was starting to act like a normal 8-year-old child. Little Fox's natural playfulness was returning as her strength improved. But Storm Eagle also noticed things that the casual observer might miss. Despite their improving health and spirits, his daughters still looked toward the door every time they heard horses or voices outside. They were clearly hoping that someone from their family would come for them. At night, when they thought Miss Mackenzie was not looking, they would whisper to each other in Comanche about their father and their home village. Miss Mackenzie seemed to sense the children's divided loyalties, even though she could not understand their private conversations. Storm Eagle observed her watching them with thoughtful eyes, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle that had no easy answer. She clearly cared about Morningstar and Little Fox, but she also seemed to understand that they belonged somewhere else, with people who were probably desperately searching for them. On the afternoon of the third day, Storm Eagle's careful surveillance was almost discovered when a group of settlement children came to visit Miss Mackenzie's cabin. They had heard rumors about the mysterious children who had appeared during the storm, and their curiosity had finally overcome their parents' warnings to stay away. Storm Eagle watched tensely as 5 young settlers, ranging in age from about 6 to 12 years old, approached the cabin door. Their leader was a boy with sandy hair who knocked politely and called out, "Miss Mackenzie? Our mothers said we could come see if you need any help with the Indian children." The woman appeared at the door, and Storm Eagle could see the conflict in her expression. She clearly did not want to expose Morningstar and Little Fox to potentially hostile attitudes from the settlement children, but she also seemed to recognize that isolation was not healthy for any young person. After a moment of consideration, Miss Mackenzie invited the visiting children to sit on the small porch while she brought Morningstar and Little Fox outside for some fresh air. What followed was one of the most remarkable scenes Storm Eagle had ever witnessed. The settlement children stared curiously at his daughters, clearly fascinated by their different appearance and clothing. But instead of showing fear or hostility, they began trying to communicate through the universal language of childhood play. One girl offered Morningstar a small wildflower she had picked on the way to the cabin. A younger boy showed Little Fox how to skip stones in a nearby puddle left by the recent rains. Within minutes, all the children were playing together, using gestures and laughter to bridge the gap between their different languages and cultures. They played simple games like tag and hide and seek that required no words to understand. Morningstar and Little Fox seemed delighted to have playmates their own age, and the settlement children appeared genuinely interested in learning about their new friends. Miss Mackenzie supervised the play with watchful eyes, ready to intervene if any problems arose. But no intervention was needed. The children had found their own way to connect across the barriers that divided their adult worlds. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Morningstar and Little Fox looked completely relaxed and happy. As Storm Eagle observed this unexpected scene of cooperation, he found himself thinking about the future in ways he had never considered before. His daughters were clearly capable of adapting to this new environment while still maintaining their connection to their own heritage. The settlement children were proving that friendship could exist between their peoples, at least among the young who had not yet learned to hate and fear each other. When evening came and the visiting children returned to their homes, Miss Mackenzie brought Morningstar and Little Fox back inside the cabin. Storm Eagle could see through the window that both girls were more animated than they had been since their arrival. They chattered excitedly to each other in Comanche, probably sharing their impressions of their new friends and the games they had played. But Storm Eagle also noticed something else that made his heart ache with unexpected emotion. As Miss Mackenzie tucked his daughters into bed that night, Little Fox reached out and took the woman's hand, holding it against her cheek in a gesture of pure affection and trust. Morningstar whispered something in Comanche that sounded like a blessing or prayer for the woman who had cared for them so tenderly. Miss Mackenzie might not have understood the words, but she clearly understood the sentiment. Storm Eagle saw tears gathering in her eyes as she gently stroked Little Fox's hair and whispered what were obviously words of love and reassurance in her own language. In that moment, Storm Eagle realized that his simple mission to rescue his daughters and bring them home had become something much more complicated. Miss Mackenzie was not just a temporary caretaker who had helped his children in their time of need. She had become someone they cared about, someone who had earned their love and trust through days of selfless devotion. The question that now haunted Storm Eagle's thoughts was not how to take his daughters away from this woman, but how to honor the bond that had formed between them while still fulfilling his responsibility as their father and as a member of his tribe. The answer to that question would require a kind of courage very different from the warrior's bravery he had always relied upon. The fourth night arrived with a soft rain that drummed gently against the cabin's wooden roof. Storm Eagle had been watching and waiting for 3 days, and he knew the time had come to reveal himself. His daughters were recovering their health, but they needed to return to their people before the tribal elders decided to send a war party to retrieve them. More importantly, Storm Eagle needed to understand why this white woman had risked everything to help 2 Comanche children. As midnight approached and the settlement grew quiet, Storm Eagle moved from his hiding place in the berry bushes toward the cabin. His moccasined feet made no sound on the wet ground as he approached the front door. For a moment he hesitated, his hand raised to knock. Everything he had been taught about white settlers told him this was foolish and dangerous. But everything he had observed over the past 3 days told him this particular woman was different. Taking a deep breath, Storm Eagle knocked softly on the wooden door. Inside the cabin, he heard the immediate sounds of alarm. Miss Mackenzie's footsteps moved quickly across the floor, and he could imagine her looking around for something to defend herself with. Her voice came through the door, shaky but trying to sound brave. "Who's there? It's very late." Storm Eagle had been thinking about this moment for hours, trying to decide how to announce himself without causing panic. His English was limited but functional, learned through years of occasional trading with white merchants who ventured into Comanche territory. "I am father of children," he said simply, speaking loud enough for her to hear through the door. "I come for Morningstar and Little Fox." The silence that followed lasted so long that Storm Eagle wondered if the woman had fainted from fear. But then he heard her voice again, much closer to the door now, filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "Are you really their father? The girls have been waiting for someone to come for them. I am Storm Eagle. Morningstar wears blue beads on dress. Little Fox has small scar on left hand from sharp rock." Another pause, and then Storm Eagle heard the sound of wooden bars being lifted from the door. When it opened, he found himself face to face with Miss Mackenzie for the first time. She was smaller than she had appeared from a distance, with tired eyes that showed both fear and determination. In her hands, she held a small oil lamp that cast dancing shadows across both of their faces. For a long moment, Neither of them spoke. Storm Eagle had expected to feel anger or suspicion when he finally confronted his daughter's captor. Instead, he felt an unexpected sense of gratitude toward this woman who had clearly sacrificed her own comfort and safety to care for his children. Miss Mackenzie broke the silence first. "Please come in," but quietly. "The girls are finally sleeping peacefully." Storm Eagle stepped into the warm cabin, his eyes immediately searching for his daughters. They lay curled together in the bed he had been watching through the window, their breathing deep and regular with healthy sleep. Little Fox clutched her cornhusk doll, while Morningstar's arm was wrapped protectively around her younger sister even in sleep. "They are beautiful children," Miss Mackenzie said softly, following his gaze. "Morningstar has been so brave taking care of her little sister, and Little Fox has such a sweet spirit even when she was very sick with fever." Storm Eagle turned to study the woman more carefully in the lamplight. Her red-brown hair was loose around her shoulders, and she wore a simple white nightgown covered by a thick shawl. But what struck him most were her eyes, which showed genuine affection when she looked at his daughters. "Why?" he asked, the single word carrying all the questions that had been building up inside him for days. "Why you help Comanche children?" "Your people and my people, we fight. We no trust each other." Miss Mackenzie gestured for him to sit at her small wooden table, then took the chair across from him. She set the oil lamp between them, creating a small circle of light in the dark cabin. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but Storm Eagle could hear the emotion behind her words. "I found them during the storm," she began. "I was coming back from checking on my chickens when I saw two small figures stumbling through the rain. They were so cold and scared, and they could barely stand up. I couldn't just leave them out there to die, no matter where they came from." Storm Eagle nodded slowly. This matched what he had expected about how his daughters came to be here. But it still did not explain why Miss Mackenzie had continued to care for them once the immediate danger had passed. "At first I thought I would take them to the sheriff in the morning," she continued. "Let him figure out what to do with them. But when I saw how frightened they were, how they held on to each other like they were afraid I might separate them, I just couldn't bring myself to turn them over to men who might not understand that they were just lost children, not enemies." Miss Mackenzie paused and looked toward the bed where Morningstar and Little Fox slept. "And then Little Fox got so sick with the fever." She was calling out in her own language, clearly wanting her family. "I realized that these weren't just any children. They were someone's daughters, and somewhere their parents were probably sick with worry, not knowing what had happened to them." Storm Eagle felt his throat tighten with emotion as he listened to this woman's simple explanation of why she had risked everything to help his family. "You know I come for them. You know I take them away from you." "Yes," Miss Mackenzie replied without hesitation. "I've known from the beginning that someday their family would come looking for them. I've been trying to keep them healthy and safe until that day arrived. I never intended to keep them permanently." Something in her voice made Storm Eagle look at her more carefully. There was a sadness there that went deeper than just the prospect of saying goodbye to children she had grown to care about. It was the kind of sadness that came from a loss much more personal and permanent. "You have children?" he asked gently. Miss Mackenzie's eyes filled with tears, but she did not try to hide them. "I had a daughter. Her name was Emma. She would have been about Little Fox's age now if she had lived. She died last winter from the same fever that Little Fox just recovered from." The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge connecting two very different worlds of grief and loss. Storm Eagle understood now why this woman had been so devoted to caring for his sick daughter. She was not just helping stranger children. She was trying to save the daughter she had lost. "I am sorry," Storm Eagle said, and he meant it with all his heart. "Lose child is worse pain for parent. When I saw Little Fox so sick with fever, it was like getting a second chance," Miss Mackenzie continued, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I couldn't save Emma, but maybe I could save Little Fox. And Morningstar reminded me so much of how Emma used to take care of her dolls and younger children in the settlement. They both have that same gentle spirit." Storm Eagle reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over Miss Mackenzie's smaller one. It was a gesture that crossed all the boundaries between their peoples, one parent comforting another in their shared understanding of love and loss. "You saved my daughters," he said simply. "I never forget this. My people never forget this." Miss Mackenzie squeezed his hand in return. "Will you tell me about them? About their lives with your people? I've been wondering what kind of family they come from, what their days are usually like." For the next hour, Storm Eagle found himself doing something he had never imagined possible. He sat in a white woman's cabin, sharing stories about his daughters and his tribe, describing their daily life on the plains and the traditions that shaped their world. Miss Mackenzie listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed how carefully she had been observing Morningstar and Little Fox during their stay with her. Morningstar loves to help with cooking, Storm Eagle explained. She always wants to learn new things. Little Fox, she is more like small wild animal, always running, always curious about everything. I could see that in them, Miss Mackenzie replied with a soft smile. Morningstar tried so hard to help me take care of Little Fox when she was sick. And Little Fox, even when she was feeling terrible, she still wanted to explore every corner of the cabin. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside the cabin windows, both adults knew that their time of conversation was coming to an end. Soon the settlement would wake up and Storm Eagle would need to take his daughters and disappear before anyone discovered his presence there. But something had changed during their long night of talking. Storm Eagle no longer saw Miss Mackenzie as a stranger who had accidentally become involved in his family's crisis. She had become someone he respected and trusted, someone who had earned a permanent place in his heart through her selfless care for his children. And Miss Mackenzie no longer saw Storm Eagle as the dangerous savage her people had taught her to fear. He was simply a father who loved his daughters enough to risk everything to find them and bring them safely home. As the first light of dawn crept through the cabin windows, Storm Eagle knew he should wake his daughters and begin the journey back to his people. Every minute he remained in the settlement increased the danger for everyone involved. But something held him back from ending this remarkable night of conversation with Miss Mackenzie. Before we go, he said quietly, I want to understand more. You live alone in this place. Where is your family? Your husband? Miss Mackenzie's face grew shadowy with remembered pain. My husband died 6 months ago. There was trouble with cattle thieves, and he rode out with other men to stop them. He never came back. She paused, looking down at her hands. After Emma died and then losing my husband, I thought about leaving this place, going back east to live with my sister. But this cabin, this land, it's all I have left of the life we built together. Storm Eagle nodded with understanding. Among his people, widows were protected and cared for by the extended family and tribe. The idea of a woman living completely alone, especially on the dangerous frontier, was almost unimaginable to him. It explained much about Miss Mackenzie's courage and her willingness to help his daughters despite the risks. Life here is hard for you, he observed. Why you stay when you could go to safer place? I suppose I stay because this is where I learned to love and be loved, she replied. Even though those people are gone, the memories are here. And lately, taking care of Morningstar and Little Fox has reminded me that life isn't just about holding on to the past. Sometimes it's about finding new reasons to hope for the future. Storm Eagle studied her face in the growing daylight. This woman possessed a strength that reminded him of the finest warriors in his tribe. Not the physical strength that came from muscles and weapons, but the deeper strength that came from facing great loss and choosing to continue living and loving despite the pain. You know much about children, he said. You know how to make them feel safe, how to heal sickness. Where you learn these things? Miss Mackenzie smiled for the first time since they had begun talking. From my own mother, mostly. She was a midwife and healer in our community back in Missouri before we moved west. She used to say that taking care of people was the most important work anyone could do, because it was the work that connected us all together, regardless of our differences. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, like our tribal grandmothers who teach young people about healing plants and caring for others. I think she would have liked your daughters very much, Miss Mackenzie said softly. They have such good hearts. Morningstar especially has shown wisdom beyond her years in how she cares for Little Fox. And Little Fox has this way of bringing light into any room she enters, even when she's not feeling well. Storm Eagle felt pride swell in his chest at her words. These observations from someone outside his tribe confirmed what he already knew about his daughter's characters. But hearing them from Miss Mackenzie also made him realize how much she had genuinely come to love and understand his children in just a few days. They learned some English words while staying here, he noted, having observed their interactions through the window. You also learned some of our language. Yes, we've been teaching each other. It started because I needed to understand when they were in pain or needed something, but it became a kind of game for all of us. Morningstar is very good at remembering new words, and Little Fox loves the sounds of different languages. She tries to repeat everything she hears. Miss Mackenzie got up from the table and moved to a shelf near the window. She returned with a small bundle wrapped in cloth, which she placed in front of Storm Eagle. I wanted to give you these before you take the girls home. Storm Eagle unwrapped the bundle to find several small items that made his eyes widen with surprise. There was a simple wooden doll that Miss Mackenzie had carved and dressed to look like a Comanche child, clearly meant as a companion to Little Fox's cornhusk doll. There were also small moccasins that she had somehow crafted in the traditional style, though not quite perfect in their construction. How you know how to make these things? He asked, examining the moccasins with amazement. Morning Star showed me, Miss Mackenzie explained. She drew pictures in the dirt outside and used hand gestures to explain how her people make shoes and clothing. I tried my best to copy what she showed me. I thought the girls might want something to remember their time here, something that honored both their world and mine. But the most remarkable item in the bundle was a small book with blank pages, bound in soft leather. Miss Mackenzie had filled several pages with simple drawings in English words, while other pages contained what appeared to be Comanche words written in English letters. What is this? Storm Eagle asked, though he was beginning to understand. It's a book of words and pictures that we made together. I drew pictures of things in my world and wrote the English words for them. Morning Star and Little Fox taught me the Comanche words for the same things, and I tried to write them down as they sounded to me. I thought maybe it could help them remember what they learned here, and maybe teach other people in your tribe some English words if they want to learn. Storm Eagle flipped through the pages, seeing pictures of animals, plants, tools, and people, each labeled with words in both languages. It was a bridge between worlds, created by the innocent collaboration of children and a caring adult. More than that, it was a tool that could help his people understand and communicate with the white settlers if they ever chose to do so peacefully. This is great gift, he said, his voice thick with emotion, but I have nothing to give you in return. You've already given me more than you know, Miss Mackenzie replied. You've trusted me with your daughters' lives. You've shown me that people from different worlds can find common ground when they meet each other with open hearts instead of closed fists. That's worth more than any gift you could possibly give me. At that moment, a small voice spoke from the direction of the bed. Papa! Storm Eagle turned to see Morning Star sitting up, rubbing her eyes as she looked at him with wonder and joy. Little Fox was still asleep beside her, but Morning Star had recognized her father's voice even though she had been dreaming. Morning Star, Storm Eagle said in Comanche, rising from his chair and moving to the bedside. I have found you, little one. I have been searching for you and Little Fox. Morning Star threw her arms around her father's neck, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Papa, we got lost in the big storm and we were so scared. But the kind woman found us and took care of us when Little Fox was very sick. Little Fox began to stir as well, awakened by her sister's excited voice. When she saw Storm Eagle, she gave a squeal of delight and joined the family embrace, chattering rapidly in Comanche about everything that had happened to them. Miss Mackenzie watched this reunion from her place at the table, her own eyes bright with tears. Storm Eagle could see the mixture of joy and sadness in her expression. She was happy that the children had been reunited with their father, but she was also preparing to say goodbye to two little girls who had brought unexpected purpose and love back into her life. After the initial excitement of the reunion had settled, Storm Eagle helped his daughters get dressed in the clothes Miss Mackenzie had provided for them, but he also made sure they gathered their few possessions, including Little Fox's precious doll and the gifts Miss Mackenzie had made for them. As they prepared to leave, Morning Star approached Miss Mackenzie and spoke in careful English words she had learned during her stay. Thank you, White Mother, for taking care of Little Fox and me. We will not forget you. Little Fox, not to be outdone, presented Miss Mackenzie with a small braid of grass she had woven during her recovery. It was not much of a gift, but it represented hours of careful work by small fingers, and its meaning was clear. Miss Mackenzie knelt down to hug both girls, whispering words of love and blessing in English while they responded with Comanche phrases they had taught her. Storm Eagle realized he was witnessing something remarkable, a true exchange of affection between people who had learned to communicate through kindness rather than words. As Storm Eagle prepared to lead his daughters away from the cabin, Little Fox tugged at his leather vest and looked up at him with pleading eyes. Papa, she said in Comanche, Can White Mother come with us to see our village? I want Grandmother to meet her. Morning Star joined her sister's request, switching to the broken English she had learned. Papa, White Mother very lonely here. She has no family left. Maybe she could visit our people sometimes. Storm Eagle felt his heart twist with an unexpected dilemma. He had anticipated that leaving Miss Mackenzie would be difficult for his daughters, but he had not realized how strong their emotional connection to her had become. Looking at their hopeful faces, he could see that they genuinely loved this white woman who had saved their lives. Miss Mackenzie, understanding enough of their mixed conversation to grasp what the girls were asking, spoke gently to them in English. Your papa needs to take you home to your own people where you belong. That's what loving parents do. They make sure their children are safe with their families. But little Fox was not easily deterred. She ran to Miss Mackenzie and wrapped her small arms around the woman's legs. You are family too, she declared in Comanche, then repeated the sentiment in her limited English. You family too. Storm Eagle watched this scene with growing confusion and concern. His daughters had clearly formed a deep attachment to their rescuer, deeper than he had initially realized. Simply taking them away might heal their bodies but wound their hearts in ways that could last for years. At the same time, he knew that the tribal elders were expecting him to return with the girls soon. Every day he delayed increased the likelihood that other Comanche warriors would come looking for them, potentially leading to violence between his people and the white settlement. The safety of many people, not just his own family, depended on his ability to resolve this situation quickly. Miss Mackenzie, he said carefully, my daughters are right that you are alone here, but you also right that they belong with their people. This is a difficult problem with no easy answer. Miss Mackenzie knelt down to Morning Star and Little Fox's level, taking their hands in hers. Listen to me, both of you. I want you to know that taking care of you has been one of the greatest joys of my life. You reminded me that love doesn't end when we lose someone. It just finds new ways to grow and spread to other people. She paused, looking at each girl carefully. But your papa is right. You have a whole family waiting for you, grandparents and aunts and cousins who have been worried sick about you. You have traditions and stories and a way of life that you need to learn and carry forward. That's not something I can give you, no matter how much I care about you. Morning Star, wise beyond her 8 years, seemed to understand the complexity of the situation. But why can't we have both families? She asked. Why can't we keep you in our hearts and still go home to our people? Her question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Storm Eagle had been taught about the separation between his world and the white settlers' world. Why couldn't his daughters maintain a connection to someone who had shown them such kindness? What harm could there be in preserving the bridge of friendship that had been built during this crisis? As Storm Eagle pondered his daughter's innocent wisdom, Miss Mackenzie spoke again, this time addressing him directly. I've been thinking about something while we talked tonight, she said. You mentioned that changes are coming to this part of the country, that your people will need to learn new ways to survive alongside the white settlers. Yes, Storm Eagle confirmed. The old ways of living are becoming more difficult. Our tribal leaders speak of this often. Some say we should fight harder to preserve our traditional life. Others say we must learn to adapt or we will not survive at all. What if there was a way for your people to learn about the white man's world without giving up their own traditions? Miss Mackenzie suggested. What if someone could help your tribe understand how to deal with settlers and government officials and traders? Someone who could speak both languages and understand both ways of thinking. Storm Eagle stared at her, beginning to grasp what she was proposing. You mean someone like my daughters who have learned some of your ways while staying here? I mean your daughters could become bridges between our worlds, if they were given the opportunity to understand both sides completely. They could spend part of their time learning traditional Comanche skills and knowledge from your people, and part of their time learning about the wider world that's coming whether we want it or not. The idea was revolutionary and frightening. Storm Eagle had never heard of such an arrangement between Comanche families and white settlers, but as he looked at his daughters, he could see that they had already begun to change during their time with Miss Mackenzie. They had learned new skills, gained confidence in dealing with unfamiliar situations, and most importantly, discovered that kindness and understanding could exist between people from different backgrounds. Where would they live? Storm Eagle asked, his practical mind beginning to work through the possibilities. How would this arrangement work without putting everyone in danger? Miss Mackenzie had clearly been thinking about this question for some time. The cabin is isolated enough that visitors wouldn't attract much attention from the settlement. And it's close enough to Comanche territory that the girls could travel back and forth safely. They could spend the summer months with your tribe, learning their heritage and staying connected to their roots. During the winter months when traveling is harder anyway, they could stay here and learn English, arithmetic, and other skills that might help your people in the future. Little Fox, who had been listening to this adult conversation with the intense concentration that children bring to discussions about their own futures, suddenly clapped her hands together, like the birds, she exclaimed in Comanche. Like the birds who fly south in winter and north in summer, but they are still the same birds. Storm Eagle could not help but smile at his younger daughter's simple but profound understanding of what was being proposed. She saw no contradiction in belonging to two worlds, just as birds belonged to both the summer and winter skies. Morning Star was more thoughtful in her response. "Papa," she said carefully, "if Little Fox and I learned to speak English very well, and if we learned to read and write and understand the white people's ways, we could help our whole tribe when they need to trade or talk to government men or solve problems with settlers." Her words struck Storm Eagle like an arrow hitting its target. His 8-year-old daughter had immediately understood the strategic value of what Miss Mackenzie was proposing. In a changing world, knowledge would be just as important as courage for protecting their people. But Storm Eagle also recognized the enormous risks involved in such a plan. If other members of his tribe discovered that he was allowing his daughters to live part-time with a white woman, he could be accused of betraying their traditions and putting Comanche children in danger. If the white settlers learned about the arrangement, they might see it as a threat or an attempt to infiltrate their community. "This is a very dangerous idea," Storm Eagle said slowly. "Many people, both Comanche and white, would not understand. They would see it as betrayal or as trick." "Yes," Miss Mackenzie agreed. "It would have to be kept secret, at least at first. And it would only work if we all trusted each other completely. But Storm Eagle, I've seen what your daughters can become when they're given the chance to learn and grow. Morning Star has the wisdom to become a great leader someday. And Little Fox has the spirit to bring joy and hope to anyone she meets. If we limit them to just one world or the other, we're not giving them the chance to become everything they could be." Storm Eagle looked at his daughters, seeing them not just as the children he needed to protect, but as the young women they would someday become. In a world where his people would need to navigate between traditional life and modern challenges, leaders who understood both worlds would be invaluable. The decision he made in the next few minutes would affect not just his own family, but potentially the future of his entire tribe. Storm Eagle stood in the doorway of the small cabin, watching the sun rise over the prairie horizon. His daughters sat at Miss Mackenzie's table, sharing a simple breakfast of cornbread and honey while chattering in their mixture of Comanche and English words. The sight filled him with both profound love and deep uncertainty about the decision he was about to make. For several long minutes, he weighed everything he had learned during this extraordinary night. Miss Mackenzie was not the enemy he had expected to find. His daughters had not been captured or harmed, but had instead discovered that kindness could exist between people their tribes considered natural enemies. Most importantly, Morning Star and Little Fox had begun to grow and learn in ways that could benefit their entire people in the challenging years ahead. Taking a deep breath, Storm Eagle turned back toward the woman who had changed his understanding of the world. "Miss Mackenzie," he said slowly, "I will agree to your proposal, but with conditions that must be accepted by all of us." Miss Mackenzie's eyes widened with surprise and hope. She had clearly expected him to reject the idea as too dangerous and unprecedented. "What conditions?" she asked. "First, this arrangement must remain secret from both our peoples until we are certain it can work safely. If anyone discovers what we are doing before we are ready, it could bring great danger to all of us." "I understand," Miss Mackenzie nodded. "I would never do anything to put Morning Star and Little Fox at risk." "Second," Storm Eagle continued, "my daughters must never forget that they are Comanche. Whatever they learn in your world must add to their knowledge, not replace their heritage. They must return to our village for all important ceremonies and celebrations, and they must continue to speak our language and follow our traditions." "Of course," Miss Mackenzie agreed immediately. "I would never want them to lose connection to their own people and culture. That's not what this is about." "Third," If at any time either of my daughters becomes unhappy with this arrangement, or if it appears to be harming them in any way, it will end immediately, and they will return to live full-time with our tribe." "That's exactly what should happen," Miss Mackenzie confirmed. "Their well-being must always come first." Storm Eagle looked at his daughters, who had stopped eating and were listening intently to this adult conversation that would determine their future. "Morning Star, little fox, do you understand what we are discussing? Do you want to spend part of your time here with White Mother, learning her people's ways while also spending part of your time with our tribe, learning our traditions?" Morning Star stood up from her chair and walked to her father with the serious expression she wore when she was thinking carefully about important matters. "Papa," she said in Comanche, "I think this could be good for our people. If Little Fox and I learn to understand both worlds, maybe someday we can help prevent the fighting and fear between them." Little Fox joined her sister, taking Storm Eagle's large hand in both of her small ones. "And Papa," she added with her characteristic enthusiasm, "White Mother makes very good soup and she knows songs we've never heard before. There's so much to learn here." Storm Eagle felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, despite the seriousness of the moment. His daughters possessed the adaptability and courage of true Comanche warriors, combined with an openness to new experiences that could serve them well in the changing world they would inherit. "Then we will try this new way," he declared, "but we will be very careful, and we will start slowly." Miss Mackenzie wiped tears from her eyes as the full meaning of his decision sank in. "How will we manage the practical details?" she asked. "When will they come and go? How will we communicate if problems arise?" Storm Eagle had been thinking about these questions during their long night of conversation. "I will bring them back here when the leaves begin to change color in the fall. They will stay with you through the winter months, when travel is difficult anyway and our people remain closer to the main winter camp. When the spring comes and the grass grows green again, I will return for them, and they will spend the warm months with our tribe." "That makes sense," Miss Mackenzie agreed. "The winter months are quieter here anyway, with less chance of unexpected visitors who might ask questions about who the girls are. I will also visit sometimes during the winter, to make sure my daughters are safe and happy, and to see how they are progressing in their learning. We will establish regular meeting places where we can talk without being observed by others." As they worked out the details of their unprecedented arrangement, Storm Eagle found himself marveling at how natural this conversation felt. Just hours earlier, he had been prepared to fight this woman if necessary to rescue his daughters. Now he was planning to entrust them to her care for months at a time, based on nothing more than his observation of her character and his daughter's obvious affection for her. The sound of horses approaching the cabin interrupted their planning session. Storm Eagle immediately moved to the window, his warrior instincts alert to potential danger. In the distance, he could see several riders heading in their direction, probably settlers coming to check on Miss Mackenzie after the previous night's search for the mysterious Indian scout. "I must go now," Storm Eagle said urgently. "If they find me here, it will ruin everything before we even begin." Miss Mackenzie understood immediately. "Take the girls and leave through the back door. There's a path that leads to the creek, and from there you can reach the hills without being seen from the main trail." Storm Eagle gathered his daughters quickly, making sure they had their few possessions and the gifts Miss Mackenzie had made for them. But as they prepared to leave, Morning Star ran back to hug their white friend one more time. "We will see you when the leaves turn colors," she promised in English. Little Fox also insisted on a final embrace. "Don't be lonely, White Mother. We will come back to you." Miss Mackenzie knelt down to hug both girls, her voice steady despite her emotional state. "I'll be waiting for you. Use the time with your tribe to learn everything you can about your people's ways. And remember, no matter where you are, you carry my love with you always." Storm Eagle led his daughters quickly away from the cabin, following the path Miss Mackenzie had described. As they reached the safety of the tree line, he turned back for one last look at the small building where his understanding of the world had been forever changed. Miss Mackenzie stood in her doorway, watching them go with a mixture of sadness and hope in her expression. She raised her hand in a gesture of farewell that seemed to carry all the love and promise of their new arrangement. The journey back to the Comanche camp took most of the day, with Storm Eagle and his daughters traveling carefully to avoid any settlers who might still be searching for signs of Indian activity. As they walked, Morning Star and Little Fox chattered excitedly about everything they had experienced, switching between languages as they tried to share all their new knowledge and impressions. When they finally reached their own village, the reception was everything Storm Eagle had expected. The entire tribe gathered around them, celebrating the safe return of the missing children and praising Storm Eagle's skill in tracking them down. The tribal elders listened with great interest to his carefully edited account of how he had found the girls sheltering in an abandoned cabin after becoming lost during the storm. Red Cloud, the wise elder who had first told Storm Eagle about his daughter's disappearance, studied the children carefully as they were welcomed back into the community. "They look well," he observed. "Not like children who have been lost and frightened for many days." "They are strong girls," Storm Eagle replied simply. "And they were fortunate to find shelter from the worst of the weather." That night, as the village settled into sleep, Storm Eagle lay in his family's teepee, listening to his daughters whisper quietly to each other in the darkness. They were sharing memories of their adventure, processing everything they had experienced during their time away from home. "Papa," Morningstar's voice came softly through the darkness. "Are you sure the arrangement we made with White Mother will work? It seems like such a big secret to keep." Storm Eagle considered his answer carefully. "All important changes begin as secrets, little one. When your grandmother was young, she secretly learned healing skills that were usually taught only to men. When those skills saved lives during a terrible sickness, the tribe accepted her as a healer. Sometimes we must prove that new ways can work before others will understand them." Little Fox stirred on her sleeping mat. "Will our people be angry if they find out we are learning white people's ways?" "Some might be angry at first," Storm Eagle admitted. "But if you use what you learned to help our tribe, to protect our people and preserve our way of life, then eventually they will understand that knowledge is a tool, like a knife or a bow. It is not dangerous by itself. It only becomes dangerous or helpful depending on how it is used." As the months passed and autumn approached, Storm Eagle watched his daughters carefully for any signs that their unusual experience had harmed them or made them less connected to their Comanche identity. Instead, he saw young girls who seemed more confident and curious than before, eager to learn about every aspect of their traditional culture while,